which is analytically thinking, reflecting, connecting dots, observing incisively, and so on. But we won't start with that. We'll start with stories. Okay? This is actually a very special place called Basgo, famous in history for once being the capital of Ladakh. When one of the kings established his palace here, and on that rock you can see over there, on that rock what you see parts of is the palace of Basgo. In the 15th century it started, so 500 years ago till about 300 years ago they were building and ruling from here. That's the historical part, but more about that. This is also where you have had some connection with this place. You see the colors of those mountains? What does it look like? Reddish, dark reddish, no?
Yes.
And when you were doing that plastering exercise, do you remember some material that was of that color? Clay.
Yes.
That clay we call Basgo clay,
Oh.
and it comes from this valley. Yeah? So you already have touched Basgo history later, but recent history is from when this was made for some time the capital of the Namgyal dynasty of Ladakh. Okay. So connecting dots and taking inferences is very important. If you are thinking in that order, it leads to many interesting discoveries and innovations. Basgo clay that you saw itself was an interesting innovation in a way. It wasn't used like clay, like we used till very recently, in recent history. Further back if you go, I'll tell you how we find. But some 20 years ago, me and my brother were playing with different gravels of different kinds, and we would play putting it in water, bottles, glasses. And one very interesting thing we saw was one of these gravels by morning had completely melted in the glass. It had become a fine paste, the finest paste you can think of, like cream. It looked like any other gravel, any other stone, and then suddenly it had become this finest paste. Later we saw that it had very good binding capacity of holding grains of sand and other grains. Yeah? And that's how we came across Basgo clay. In a place in the high Himalayas, clays should not be present. This is very early stage of the soil formation. So what you find in high Himalayas or any high mountains and these Rockies is rocks and stones and pebbles and gravels, and so clays should not be found, but we had found. Okay, so that's one story of how observing that glass with what looked like gravel led us to this discovery of this wonderful material right close to us. Otherwise you end up importing clay from thousands of miles. That many people use clay for not just buildings, but if you talk to Pascal, he'll tell you about his swear and tell you books about its health healing properties. So do connect with him. So clays have many interesting uses, but this was one use we found, and we benefited completely from it. All our buildings ever since then look reddish in color because of the Basgo clay. Okay. In fact, Ladakh in the ancient times was called Maryul. Maryul means the red land.
Oh, that's why we have red mountains here.
You guess why? Yes. Because people who came here and settled saw these remarkable red mountains,
Yes.
which are from iron oxides. That will make it boring. so that gave its name and its color. There are so many colors, but this red stands out.
Yes.
So that's the story of the clay. But here I'll tell you about that mountain on top of which you have the palace. Huh? What you see today is only the temple part of the palace. The palace itself has fallen down. The temple was preserved because people have, their faith. So there's a famous Maitreya Buddha and other statues there. So they have kept it very well preserved. Now, King of Ladakh must have found a very beautiful, outcrop or a hill to watch far away, to ward off enemies and so on. They used to look for such safe places
Vantage
when they
points.
would.
Vantage point.
Yes, when they would build forts and castles. Okay, so he was very happy he had found this. I'll come to how his happiness washed away. There's an interesting story about the king and this palace. Some 500 years ago, when he was ruling from this palace, there was a war, an invasion actually, from Tibeto-Mongol forces. So Mongol generals with Tibetan army, they used to have wars in this region for various reasons, sometimes sectarian wars. So the Mongol general, who was very famously capable, and this is folklore story about the king and his palace. So where he was not lucky, turns out, was in a much bigger choice he made. The choice of making his capital and his palace on that mountain. He thought, like I and my brother thought, it was like any rock, any gravel. It turned out it was not stone or rock at all. It was a clay mountain, which was very different from all these rocks you see here. They're hard and will remain hard unless ground. But this, with every rain, would melt and wash because they couldn't see it. Maybe they saw it also, but they didn't observe it and connect that if this much washed over a century, so much will wash, and over few centuries, so much will wash that their whole foundations will start flowing with the melting clay. And that's what is my guess. I'm connecting dots again myself. Why did they move from here? If you go there, because we don't have time, we won't, you will see fallen, very, very strong walls that are, I tested walls from here in laboratories in France. They're some of the best rammed earth strengths that you could acquire. Okay, but those walls are useless when the
base
foundation is melting away. So you will see these walls fallen, and you would think it's a rock, but it is man-made walls that are still holding like rocks fallen on the ground. Useless if the foundation is
true.
like wax, palace of wax. This was a palace of clay.